Hey everybody, so here's a video I promised for a while now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the active body control suspension. On a lot of Mercedes cars, a lot of S-Classes, CL Coupes, S-Coupes come with the suspension. This S63 is an ABC car. Now, the main thing about it is, how does it compare to Airmatic? Airmatic, they both ride equally as well. I've driven Airmatic S550s, S500s, but the ABC is a little bit more, I'm going to say, dynamic. It handles a lot better than Airmatic cars. Airmatic's a little bit too wafty for me, a little bit too much like a Cadillac. I'm not a big fan of it. Whereas ABC rides, they ride just as nice as Airmatic cars, and handling wise, they're a lot better. Even though the cars feel heavy, like especially an S-Class, something like that, it is a heavy car, but especially they do feel heavy. ABC improves these things a lot. My new S65 has a version of ABC called MBC, which is magic body control, that tilts the cars in corners, and the thing handles better than it has any right to. But the main issues with ABC cars are the maintenance. People don't maintain these things. Everyone assumes just because it's a big money suspension that you can just do whatever you want to it. It's not completely true. Anything that's made by people can break. The shocks can break. If you're riding every pothole in your city and you bust a shock, don't be surprised about it. But if you swerve potholes like a normal person should, then you should be okay. Now, the main components when we're talking about the ABC suspension is, first, the tandem pump. Now, I say tandem meaning two. This pump it has a rotor for the power steering and for the suspension. So the ABC fluid is, between me and you, it is just a power steering fluid, the green hydraulic oil, CHF 11. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a Pentacin fluid if you just get it from like an AutoZone or something. But tandem pump, and then it goes out to the lines. The lines they go to valve blocks, but in between these valve blocks and the shocks, there are going to be these things called accumulators, and it literally looks like a cannonball, and they're nitrogen filled, and there's a diaphragm inside. What these things do is they regulate some of the pressure. Essentially they'll save the lines, because a lot of people have burst lines, but the thing is, these accumulators last 6 or 7 years, and nobody ever replaces these things. FCP sells a kit for it. It's about $550, and if you're at all good with tools, anybody can do this. They literally unthread and thread back in. You just have to get to them. Usually, like on this is a 221 S63. If you open the trunk, normally where a spare tire would be, it's in the wheel well. So is on the 222 S65. My W220 S65, the car I sold a few months ago, that one, it was actually underneath the car behind the wheel well, and there was actually a disconnect for the muffler on the passenger side that you had to drop the muffler to get to it. And that was the only really tricky one to get. The other one is in front of the front left corner of the car. It's behind the plastic fender liner, and then you have to fish it out. And then the other two are right on the, let's say, at the near the back of the engine, right by the transmission bell housing. The other two are right there, and those are easy as can be. They thread on. Now, a way you would know those were going bad is they actually start to shake. So if you hear a random rattle that has nothing to do with engine RPM, and it just happens, like the car will be running and then you'll hear just, and then it stops, it's a good indicator that the accumulators are on their way out. They last about 6-7 years, and they're not terribly difficult to replace, not terribly expensive either. And now, as for the valve blocks, the older cars, the valve blocks will lock fluid into the shocks. So when you park the car, if the car starts to sag, this could be one of two things. One, either the valve block is starting to leak because the fluid is now leaking past the seals in it, or the shock is bad. If your shock is dry and there's no puddle of fluid, you can just assume it's the valve block. Now, on some of the older cars, let's say W220, W215, these is S-Class sedans and CL Coupes, those valve blocks are actually rebuildable. So you can buy a set, you can get them on eBay and whatnot. They actually work pretty well. You can get one of these sets, and it's not terribly difficult to rebuild them. Taking the thing apart is a little bit tricky. I suggest you watch a video about it. Anybody can do it. I did it my first time. It was no big deal. But the only thing you have to deal with is the hydraulic oil is so slippery. You'll be gripping the parts all the time, and it really wears your forearms out. So it takes a lot of energy to do it. But keep a couple clean rags on hand, a little bit of brake clean, and you don't spray all the electrical components down. It's something you can easily rebuild. So we've covered the accumulators and the valve blocks. As for shocks, you've got to drive better. You can't just hit every pothole in the city and expect the shock not to blow out on you. It was made by people, it can break. Now, my oldest 65, that car had the original shocks on it, and I sold that car with 106,000 miles, and the shocks never leaked on me or anything like that. Never had a puddle of fluid come from that car, except for an instance I'll tell you. But I rebuilt both the valve blocks on that car, front and rear, and I replaced all the accumulators. At one time, I had replaced my intercooler pump with a really big one, and when I would start the car, I would just get this thud. It would just start, and then I assumed it was the pump kicking on for a little while. So I explained it to a friend of mine who's a good mechanic. He's like, I think your accumulator is bad. And I was like, oh, really? Because then it started tapping constantly, how I described before, where, you know, you could be sitting at a light or you're just driving, pulling away from a light. You'll hear a random tapping sound, and it'll have nothing to do with engine RPM. If, you know, you'll turn the steering wheel, it has nothing to do with the steering, anything like that. Accumulators, those have to be replaced 6 or 7 years, and the valve blocks would be rebuilt as needed. On some of the newer cars, I'm not sure about this 221 here, but it is on the 222. Those valve blocks are sealed, so you can't really rebuild them. I'm not sure if you have the option to swap it for an older style valve block. It should fit. Maybe it'll work on a 221. I'm not entirely sure. I don't have a lot of experience with this car. I haven't gotten running. The motor is still being rebuilt now. But on the 222, I would definitely have to, if the valve blocks started to leak, as in the car sagging and not leaving a puddle, which means the valve block is leaking back into the lines, I would have to, you know, cough up maybe $2,000 and replace it. But, you know, that's the kind of price you pay for that level of performance. It's an amazing suspension system. Now, one thing, the lines pretty much, they get kept safe. The only way you'll wear a line out if your accumulator is still in good shape is you got to go over there and keep an eye on them. Because on my 220, it's a broken piece of a piston ring, by the way. On my 220, I actually was looking underneath it, changing the oil one time, and one line had started to rub against another one. There was there was about a rubber bushing in between. You know, the ones that you kind of see them on coolant hoses, they'll like snap onto each other and it'll hold the line separate like this. That bushing had broken, and then the soft part of the line was on top of the hard part of the line, because they're stainless steel at the end and then they're hose. And it started to rub, and it hadn't broken through, but it actually rubbed an indentation into the upper hose. So you've got to keep an eye on, and you just go through and make sure nothing's contacting, because they do. This is a 3,000 psi system. Those lines will move here and there, especially as you drive. So I had just put a rubber bushing in and got another one, put it in between, and it was fine ever since then. So hoses are pretty much saved by the accumulators, valve blocks. I mean, it's a $50 kit to reseal a valve block, and then any competent mechanic would do it. I'd rather you just learn to do it yourself. You're going to save a lot of time and headache with it, and plus you get the satisfaction of fixing your own car. And one line you can't really save on these cars, and it's down to that 3,000 psi I mentioned for the tandem pump. One line you can't save is called the ABC dampener hose. Now, if you've taken an ABC pump out, or if you looked at it, they use a banjo bolt, which is a funky kind of a screw that's hollow on the inside, and it threads a fitting on, and the oil will come down through the pump and through the screw and into the hose. And those are called banjo bolts. But there's two hoses straight off of the ABC pump. One will be the dampener hose, and the other one will start going towards the rest of the system. It'll go towards the front two valve blocks, and there'll be a split, and it goes to the rear. But the dampener hose, you can see it on any of these. On the 65s, I know it's visible right there under the hood. You can see it come down right under the crank pulley. It makes a U-turn. It goes about 12 inches, and then it just stops. It's literally a hose to nowhere, and that's what its job is. It's a dampener hose. It kills some of the pressure off. Now, I had seen this hose on my 220 start to seep, as in it was like coming through the actual hose, nothing with the stainless steel. The stainless steel parts never break, but they don't break, they don't burst or anything like that, but it's always the flexible hose sections, and it started to seep. So I just bought a new hose. I said, I don't want to be stuck on the side of the road with this thing. I bought a new hose and I replaced it. Now, this is something you can totally do yourself. I use a suction tool, the same thing I use to change my oil. I would drain the reservoirs, pull them out, and then get an adjustable wrench in there, undo the banjo bolt, and then fish the lines out, swap them, and put it back together. Now, the thing is, I'd replaced this hose, and about 2.5 to 3 years later, 8 years I had this S65, and I've never had any crazy suspension issues with it. Other than when I was wrapping the car, it started to sag in the rear, and I resealed the valve block, and then I just got one for the front and decided to reseal it too, just because I was doing it. But I wasn't driving the car very much anymore because I had my W222 S65 at the time. This was maybe last November, and I sold the 220 in February. So I let the car idle, warm up. I would keep it on the battery tender, that kind of thing. I don't want to deal with a dead battery. And I have the hood open, and I'm just like wiping a couple things down, and then something's spraying me in the face. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And then I look over and I see the hose is out, and I'm like, oh no. I go shut the car off, and then I go look at the hose, and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. This hose is pretty new, And this is the downfall of having a ABC pump that's in very good shape, because when you plug in the scanner, I use an iCarSoft scanner, and it can actually show you the PSI of the pump while it's running. So you can have an idea. If you're going to look at a car, you can plug one of these scanners in, go through the menu options, and you can actually have a good idea of how healthy the ABC pump is. They're rated for 200 bar. That was 2006. My 65 was making 195 just at idle. So it was running pretty strong. And the thing is, this pump hadn't burst the hose, as in there's a, let me give something to show you an example. Here's a piece of heater hose. It's a vibrant hose. It's only for water and oil, whatever you want. But it would have this U, and they're pinched into it's a pinch coupling here that comes out of the dampener hose. Now this is the end of the hose where it goes to nowhere, like I explained before. And I never thought this thing would happen like this. Instead of the hose just bursting here on its own, usually how they do, and now that's either from bad accumulators or somewhere they're rubbing each other, and it just literally sols through the hose. This pump had actually forced these are aircraft quality hoses. These like a 3-pinch fitting on here, and it actually just forced the hose clean off. And I was almost impressed. I was really mad about it, because the hose is about $270. If you get some kind of a discount or anything at the dealership, I just get things like that at the dealer. I don't want to deal with anybody's old stock or anything like that. You get a fresh one, and you get a 2-year warranty through Mercedes. But that was the only big issue I had, and thank goodness I wasn't driving the car as soon as and the fluid hadn't run out. So the ABC pump stayed intact, and I just did the same thing again. I used my suction tool. I pulled the fluid out, removed the reservoirs, undid the banjo bolts, swapped the hoses, and called it a day, and didn't have an issue again. Now the thing is about changing the oil on these things. There's a return line that goes into the, into the reservoir, and there's a main pump. So this pump is gravity fed, and it goes to one, it'll have two reservoirs. The smaller reservoir is for power steering, and the bigger reservoir is going to be for the ABC fluid. Now, there's an easy way to replace this fluid. People get some kind of special tools. You really don't need anything like that. The thing is, what you're going to want to do is you will undo the part for the filter, and you'll pull the filter out, and then there's 2 openings to these things. It'll have the opening for the return, and then the opening for the filter. So you'll pull this out, and the return, you'll disconnect it, and you'll put it into a bucket. So the fluid that's going to come back is going to go into the bucket, and it'll be real dark. The fluid's supposed to be like a bright green color, but a lot of people never even change these fluids anyway. And you'll run the car, and you'll fill the reservoir at the same time as this is emptying it into the bucket. And once you get clean fluid coming into the bucket, then you can stop filling the fluid. But the point is, if you're changing this fluid, don't ever let it run dry. Or if it's never been changed, I kind of wouldn't touch it. I've had a couple of friends just try to swap fluid without doing any other kind of service, and the pumps start to leak. So that means any kind of breakdown from the hoses or anything was clogging any leaks in the pump before, and now the new fluid that's got some detergent in it is cleaning it off and making a leak. So technically there was a leak there, but it was sealing from the inside, kind of like how on an older car, if you don't change the oil for a while, you won't notice an oil leak until you put some kind of synthetic in there, something with detergents, it cleans it up, and then it starts to leak because now all the blockages are gone, and then the motor is clean, but now you've exposed the leak. So you got to be wary with this, but there's also another thing to be wary with. A lot of people who do any kind of ABC work, if you go to a mechanic, they'll always say, oh, you got to put it in Rodeo mode. Now, if you don't know what Rodeo mode is, you can use the Mercedes Star diagnostic tool, and it'll start pivoting the car. It'll drop this corner, drop the front, and it'll start doing like a dance, kind of like how some Teslas can do. But Mercedes has been doing this for longer. And it'll do like a little dance, and this is called Rodeo mode, and it extends the shocks within their full range of motion, dropped all the way and picked up all the way. Now the thing is, a lot of shops will say, yeah, do it, you have to do it. You don't really have to do it. The only reason you do this is to keep once you open the system, replacing accumulators, rebuilding the valve block, replacing a hose that's leaking, or doing the dampener hose, anything where you're going into the system and fluids coming out, air is going to be in the system now. Now the thing is, this Rodeo mode does a great job of getting all the air out. Now the thing is with this is like a double-edged sword. One, it's a little bit easier for your maintenance, but the thing is, ABC, the Rodeo mode can actually break a shock, because sometimes some of the shocks, they don't see that much load. You know, especially a lot of people, they garage the car, they don't drive it that much, they don't hit potholes as they're driving. The suspension will, let's say, something to give you an example. Let's say this is the shock, right? And through your normal driving, this is the only range that it does, all right? So you're not hitting it with a ton of pressure. Yes, it's getting pressure from the lines, from the oil and everything, but it's not being shock loaded at all, like being driven over really rough roads or hitting sharp potholes where the shock would extend rapidly and then come back. Now, when you do Rodeo mode, now remember, this is your normal driving range, right? Now, when you do Rodeo mode, this is the range now, all the way up, now all the way down. And the shock may not like that. It may not be ready, especially if it's got more miles on it. And if you do hit the occasional pothole and it just doesn't go out, Rodeo mode can actually do it. So Rodeo mode is something, even in the directions that said you should be using it very sparingly, and you should. But other than that, ABC is a really great suspension. Rides great, performs great. It is expensive to maintain. Don't think it's going to be super cheap. Hoses can be a few $100s each, but doing the proper maintenance every 6 or 7 years for accumulators is going to be about $550. A tandem pump, if that goes out, they can be about $2,000, but people sell rebuilt ones, and you can go on eBay and get sellers that reseal these pumps. You can get them for a few $100. You don't have to pay $2,000 for everything. Resealing valve blocks, $50 a kit, and it just, if you're a competent mechanic, it'll take you about an hour. You just gotta make sure you got a bunch of clean rags on hand, because working with that hydraulic fluid can be exhausting. So those are the main things to deal with when you're talking about ABC. Make sure the pump is healthy. A dampener, keeping an eye on the dampener hose. There's actually a rubber sleeve on there. I would nick it and cut it off, so you can, when you let the car warm up, especially if you daily or anything like that, pop the hood and take a look at it. I put a paint marker. Now I'm going to start putting a paint marker on this hose. I should do it to my 222 at 65, but the thing is, the dampener hose on that is a lot longer. So a lot of the shortcomings from the older ABC are now dealt with more or less on the newer cars. But I'm going to do it to this one. I would grab a paint marker and mark that hose so you can watch it once in a while. Just check up on it, and you can see if that paint has broken. You'll see that hose is starting to come off. Now, once it starts, there's no stopping it. That means it's torn from the seals on the inside, and you should be replacing that hose before it goes out on you. I got lucky. It popped out while the car was just warming up. It was idling. Now, a lot of people aren't so lucky that the hose will pop out as they're driving. They think they can make it the 2-3 miles home, and then the pump is gone at that point, because then it runs completely dry. You're running all the fluid out, and that's that. So, healthy ABC pump, keep an eye on the dampener hose every several years to replace accumulators, and checking up on the hoses, make sure nothing's rubbing. That's one of the two main killers of ABC hoses. One, they'll rub, and two, the accumulators will not dampen the pressure, and then just let the hose, it'll find where it's weakest, probably where it's rubbing, and it'll burst the hose out. But other than that, ABC's, I really like it. You know, the old S65 was my first car. I've never had a crazy deal with the suspension other than it sagging when I wrapped it, and then that hose bursting on me before I sold it. Obviously, I replaced it with a brand new genuine Mercedes hose. But if you're mechanically competent, I wouldn't be scared of ABC. ABC is a great suspension setup. Now, if you've ridden Airmatic, ABC is gonna feel like quite an improvement. It's nowhere near as excuse me, it's nowhere near as wafty as an Airmatic car, where you'll go over several bumps and the car will just go like this and then even out, kind of like a Cadillac. Now the ABC, it'll even out immediately and then stop. That's why I like it. It's a little smoother. I think they both ride equally as good, Airmatic and the ABC. The thing is, Airmatic is definitely less maintenance intensive. It's usually the pump that goes out or the shocks. There's no accumulators, there's no valve blocks, because you're not dealing with any fluid. It's a pressurized air system, and the lines never really break on this thing. The pressure is not that crazy on Airmatic cars. But if it's a daily driver, you could, an Airmatic car would be great. It rides real soft. It's not going to handle as well as you want. ABC cars handle better. I'm not going to say it's the Lotus Elise, but it handles better than it has any right to. If you've driven 215, CL55, CL65, this 221 and 63 is an ABC car. My 220 S65 is an ABC car. My 222 is ABC, technically says MBC on the build sheet, but they handle pretty well, especially when you go MBC with the Magic Body Control. The thing handles better than it has any right to. It's really impressive. But that's just my 2 cents on ABC. I think personally it's a great suspension. If someone's an idiot and they're coasting every pothole, what can you do about it? But that's it. Everyone says it's unreliable, but everything works as you maintain it. The more you maintain it, the better it's going to work. If you don't maintain it, what else are you going to expect? All right, thank you guys.